Hello, and welcome to Juneau, Alaska. We're on Basin Road, just about a mile from downtown Juneau. This road was built in 1887 to provide access to some of the early gold mining activities in this area. In 1880, a miner by the name of George Piltz was managing one of Alaska's earliest gold mines. That mine was located in Silver Bay near Sitka. Well, Piltz knew that his mine didn't have a bright future, so he decided to send prospectors out looking for better areas to develop. In July of that year, he entered into a grubstake agreement with two prospectors by the name of Joe Juneau and Richard Harris. So Juneau and Harris were given 3 months worth of supplies. In exchange for that, they were supposed to put Piltz's name on 2 out of every 3 claims that they would stake. So the prospectors set out from Sitka in a canoe in their search for gold. Behind me is what's called Snowslide Gulch. Now, there's some controversy about just how Richard Harris and Joe Juneau managed to find their way to this place. They may have come here on their own, or they may have been led by some of the local natives, members of the Auk tribe. In either case, we have to assume that the prospectors found some traces of gold in their gold pans at the mouth of the stream. And then they worked their way upstream looking for larger quantities. It was somewhere near this very spot that they got those favorable results. This area became known as Last Chance Basin, and the prospectors named this Gold Creek. By then, it was already the end of August, and the prospectors were running out of supplies. So they went back to Sitka to report their findings. The report was so encouraging that they were sent back to continue with their prospecting. It was Nathan Fuller who joined with Piltz as a partner in the second grubstake agreement with Juneau and Harris. The agreement required that the prospectors stake their first claims in the names of Piltz and Fuller. And then the prospectors could put their own names on 1 out of every 3 claims that they staked. My name is Rick Urion. We're going to hike up Gold Creek Valley and see the place where those first gold claims were staked. We're going to tour the area that would become the second mine in the Juneau area that could claim to be the world's largest low-grade gold mine. That was the Perseverance Mine. We're going to look at the early mining and milling activities that took place here in Gold Creek Valley. And then we'll look at the mill that was eventually built at Tidewater on the other side of the mountain. And we'll see the 10,000-foot tunnel that was drilled through the mountain to connect the mill to the mine site. We'll see these areas as they look today, and then we'll flash back to see what it looked like here when the mine was in operation. And you're going to get to see some of those who hiked this area long before us. You'll see some of the miners who lived and worked here. So come on, let's go for a hike. With this well-maintained trail that goes up Gold Creek Valley today, it's sort of hard for us to imagine the hardships that the early prospectors must have endured just to hike into this area, let alone carrying in supplies and heavy equipment. In the spring of 1889, a 4-mile extension was built on the Basin Road, and it gave access all the way to the head of the valley. It cost $11,000 to build this. And it was built as a road, not as a trail, and it handled horse-drawn wagons and motorized vehicles. Most of the early mining activity here in Gold Creek was placer mining. That's where they mine on the surface, washing the gold-bearing gravel through sluice boxes to recover the gold. They had some major operations here that brought water from above and large pipelines and fed it to nozzles and under high pressure. And with those, they were able to wash the gravel off the sides of the banks and into their sluice boxes. There were also a number of small operators who used a pick and shovel to get the material into their sluice boxes. But during the first 10 years of operation, the placer miners recovered about $1 million worth of gold here. Here we see a 7-inch nozzle at work. This is another placer operation. This is a much smaller placer operation with lots of digging by hand. Joe Juneau and Richard Harris were back here in the Gold Creek Valley in October of 1880. And this time they made it all the way to the head of the valley. And it was here that they had the best results in their gold pans. They named this place Silver Bow Basin. By November of 1880, there were a number of prospectors starting to show up here, staking claims. By the spring of 1881, this valley was literally full of prospectors staking claims. After they discovered gold here, Richard Harris became the recorder for the district. He recorded the 160-acre town site on the shore of Gastineau Channel, which he named Harrisburg. It was at a miners' meeting in December of 1881 where a majority of those present voted to name the new town after the more popular Joe Juneau. Before we go any further, let's look at a map. This is downtown Juneau. Last Chance Basin is here. This is the trail that we have hiked. Icy Gulch is here. Behind me is Icy Gulch. It was there that Joe Juneau and Richard Harris staked their first gold claims. This is how Icy Gulch appeared to the early prospectors. Joe Juneau and Richard Harris staked one of their first claims here in October of 1880. They named it the Alaska Chief, and it was located about here. In the spring of 1881, two prospectors named George Garside and George Steller staked 3 claims here. The first was named the Perseverance, located about here. Their second claim was named the Jumbo, located about here. Their third claim was named the Alta, located about here. Those 3 claims became the start of the Perseverance mine. And now we're going to hike up on this ridge behind me here, and you'll see where the Perseverance mine was located. 1886 brought about the first change in ownership here. William Sanders bought out the interest of George Steller. So Sanders and Garside operated as the Gold Mountain Mining Company, and they operated what they called the Jumbo Mine. Hard rock mining, or lode mining, as we call it, is capital intensive. It takes a lot of cash to be able to put in place the facilities and machinery necessary to process the ore. Now, Garside and Sanders didn't have the cash, but they were able to convince the manufacturing company of Adams and Carter to provide some backing for them. Adams and Carter was a manufacturer of mining equipment. Early mining here ranged from simple holes in the ground. The first efforts here at both mining and milling were rather primitive. Their mining, they would just blast out the veins of quartz that showed up on the surface. That way they were taking only high-grade ore. They built an arasta here. An arasta is nothing more than a concrete slab. They would put the ore on the concrete slab, add some water, and drag heavy flat rocks over it to crush the ore. The crushed ore was bagged up and packed to the beach down the trail by burros. And the ore was taken to the Shelby Smelting Company in San Francisco. So all the gold that they recovered here to start with was recovered in California. In 1888, there was another change in ownership. This time, the Alaska Eastern Mining and Milling Company bought a major share of the jumbo mine. They had a lot more capital, and they brought materials in and built a mill. They also built a 4,000-foot tram that brought ore from the mine to the mill. That 10-stamp mill was in operation in 1889. 1892 brought about. Now it became the Juneau Mining and Manufacturing Company. William Ebner became the superintendent. Ebner brought in a generator to power air compressors. That was the first time electricity had ever been used for mining in Alaska. Of course, the generator was powered by water. With a total dependence on water for power here, the mine was only able to operate about 6 months out in operation without any spectacular until June of 1895. And then it went into receivership. A local banker by the name of B.N. Barons took control, and he leased the mill here to the neighbors. It was on the 28th of December of 1895. A large snowslide broke off of Sheep Mountain behind me, and it swept down the valley and destroyed the mill. The watchman who was staying at the mill at the time was swept away. His body wasn't found until July of that year. In May of 1896, Joseph Gilbert bought the mine, and it became the Wisconsin Mining and Manufacturing Company. He hired George Garside to be a superintendent. George Garside, as you remember, was one of the original prospectors who staked the claims here. And under his tenure, they did a lot of exploratory work here to try and determine the amount of mineral deposit in their claims. And they also bought a number of the neighboring claims. Then in 1900, new ownership. This time it was an Englishman by the name of Colonel William Sutherland bought the mine. He represented a bunch of investors from London. He formed the Alaska Perseverance Mining Company. But he was controlled by what was called the Alaska Consolidated Mines Limited of England. Charles Pierce became the superintendent, and they started in right away building some facilities here, including living quarters for miners. And then they started drilling a tunnel. This bunkhouse was the first major building built here. Here is a closer view of that building. Behind me is the tunnel they started to drill in 1901. It's called the Alexander Crosscut. By August of 1902, there were 600 feet into the mountain here. And then they brought in a compressor to operate power drills, and that really increased their production. But the compressor, of course, was operated by water. So in the wintertime, they went back to drilling by hand. For the first time, they worked here through the winter of 1902-1903, drilling this tunnel. I have a hard time imagining drilling tunnels like this by hand, but that's how many of them were done. Hand drilling required two miners working together, a team, one to hold the bit and one to swing the hammer. You can just imagine the language that exchanged between them when somebody missed the bit. But they would drill a bunch of holes at the end of the tunnel, pack them with dynamite, blast them out, and start all over again. These miners were tough and determined guys. This photograph was taken inside the Alexander Crosscut. It's hard to see them, but on the right, there are two miners working by candlelight. At 1,200 feet into the mountain, they passed through a large mineralized zone. And that really upped their hopes for a big mine. By late 1903, they were 2,400 feet into the mountain. Now, this became the main entrance to the Perseverance mine, and it became known as Level 10. At the end of the mine shaft, they started to drill an upraise, a shaft to the surface. That shaft was about 940 feet to the surface. In this old Navy aerial photograph, the mine entrance was here. The upraise came to the surface here at about the 2,100 foot elevation. Here we see the construction of the head frame that was built at the top of the shaft. The shaft was dug from both the bottom up and from the top down. This is a completed head frame. The shaft was 8 feet by 15 feet wide and 940 feet deep. The head frame was built of concrete to withstand the heavy snow at this elevation. Today, there is not much left standing. Colonel Sutherland was definitely a man who had visions for big things. In 1902, he told everyone he was going to have a 300 stamp mill in place here. He also said he was going to drill the 10,000 foot tunnel through this mountain to make it easier to get his ore to Tidewater. Colonel Sutherland had a lot of problems with contractors and suppliers during the construction of the facilities here at the mine. That may have been caused by late payments. Here we see the mill site at the start of construction. The mill, seen here at the bottom of this photograph, went into operation in June of 1907 with 30 stamps. 20 more stamps were added in August of that year. So during that first year of operation, they crushed about 32,000 tons of ore here, and they recovered about $70,000 worth of gold. By 1908, there were 100 stamps in operation here. The stamps weighed 1,200 pounds apiece, and they went up and down 104 times a minute, crushing the ore. The concentrates that were developed by the crusher were loaded into wagons and pulled to the dock down the trail with 4-horse teams. On the left, you can see a team of horses coming down the trail from the mine. Here are 2 teams of horses coming from the mine. Horses were also used to haul supplies. Under Sutherland, there were a number of false starts on projects that never got completed. One was the second 100 stamp mill. Sutherland also started to build a pipeline from here to the beach. His idea was to send this crushed ore through the pipeline as a slurry of water, then easier to get it to the beach. But that never was completed. Then there were a couple starts at building a railroad from the mine to the beach. And that one they could never complete because they could never acquire all the necessary right-of-way. And there were also 2 false starts on drilling the tunnel through the mountain to Tidewater. Behind me is the Lervay Creek. We're about a quarter mile southeast of the mine. This stream provided all of the water to power the Perseverance mine. Then in 1905, another prospector by the name of Charles Thorndike staked a placer claim here, which he called the BC claim. And he tried to prevent the Perseverance Company from using the water. So there was some extensive legal action, and in 1907, Judge James Wickersham ruled in favor of the Perseverance. Essentially, he ruled that the rights were more valuable than the claim itself, the mining claim, and he also ruled that the Perseverance mine had been using the water long before Thorndike. So the Perseverance continued their operation with the water from the stream. During all of its years of operation, the Perseverance mine was very good at generating issues that had to be resolved by the early Juneau law firms. They were involved in constant litigation. There was a suit by a former disgruntled superintendent. There was a suit involving overlapping claims, and one involving ownership of the Silver Cream mine. And there were always a number of little suits involving money that the mine owed to its various suppliers. In 1910, one of the major suits was filed by the United States government against the Perseverance. It was for a foreign ownership or control of land within the territory of Alaska. And remember, the company that was in charge here was the Alaska Consolidated Mines Limited of England. So as a result of that suit, in 1911, Sutherland formed the Gastineau Mining Company under the laws of New York. And the English investors in his original company became investors in the new company. In 1910, Colonel Sutherland bought the now Gold Mining Company, which operated the Silver Queen mine in Sheep Creek Valley on the other side of the mountain. They had a lot of property in that area, and Sutherland was attempting to consolidate all the claims in the area so they had total control. And of course he was really looking forward to the day he could actually drill a tunnel through the mountain, but he would need the interest or the ownership of all the land between here and there. It was at the same time that there were two other investors starting to look at the area. One was a local lawyer named Louis Shackelford. The other was a local miner named Bart Thane. They bought what was called the Groundhog Mine, which bordered the Perseverance on the south side. That piece of land was really a vital link in Sutherland's plan to go through the mountain. Then Bart Thane staked a placer claim just below the Perseverance, a claim that covered part of the tailing pile from the Perseverance. And that was a real blow to Sutherland. He had foolishly neglected to claim the property right next to him. There was a lot of personal animosity between Bart Thane and Sutherland. Colonel Sutherland had a number of health problems. He had been diagnosed to have a heart condition. On the 21st of April, 1911, he died. He was in England at the time, selling up the affairs of his new corporation. Upon his death, they found a number of problems that Colonel Sutherland had left for those who survived him. First of all, of the 10,000 shares of stock that he had originally issued in his company, he controlled 9,995 of them, and the stockholders only had 5 shares. In addition to that, they discovered that Colonel Sutherland had 2 wives, one in the United States and one in England. Well, after his death, Bart Thane, who already had an interest in this area, decided that he wanted to see if he couldn't get control of this Perseverance mine. So he made a trip to England and spoke with the English wife and the stockholders. And by October 11th of 1911, Bart Thane had a new corporation put together, and he became the manager. This is Bart Thane, the brazen engineer who took control of the Perseverance mine at the age of 33. So Bart Thane came back to Alaska. He then merged the property that he had bought in the area with the new company. And the new company became the Alaska Gastineau Mining Company. During all the years that this mine operated as the Perseverance, they crushed about 300,000 tons of ore and produced about $640,000 worth of gold. With Bart Thane in control, the new company was able to attract new investors. And he started out with $4.5 million to develop his new mine complex. First, they decided that they were going to build a new modern mill. And that mill was going to be run by electricity. So that meant that they not only had to design and build a new mill, they also had to design and build a substantial source of electricity. They also decided that that mill was going to be located in Sheep Creek, which is on the other side of the mountain. That required that they drill the tunnel through the mountain to connect the mine to the mill. Their plan here called for using a milling process that had never been used for gold ore before. And that process required that the ore be brought to the mill dry. So they set up a small version of their proposed mill here at the mine site in the existing mill structure. And for the first time ever, this mill is going to operate through the winter, powered by electricity from a new gas generator they had installed in Sheep Creek Valley, and they had run some power lines to the mine site. This mill was fired up on November 30th of 1912, and 4 days later, a tragedy struck. Fire broke out here at the mill. And despite the best efforts of all the miners that were here at the time, the mill was a total loss. So that loss required them to make the decision that they would set up the test mill in the old Silver Queen mine mill in Sheep Creek Valley. And that fire ended all processing of gold here in Silverbow Basin. In early 1912, Fain started making a lot of changes here at the mine. This was the main building. Inside was the kitchen and this dining room that could seat about 400 men. There was this large recreation room with pool and billiard tables. There was a bowling alley on the bottom level. Playing poker was a favored pastime. That's a box of Cuban cigars on the table. This was the staff house. The house with a great view down the valley belonged to the superintendent. Here on the valley floor was the baseball field. The company store and a medical facility were located in this area. After the mill burnt down, this compressor house was built. These were the compressors that were on the inside of that building. This was the original bunkhouse built by Colonel Sutherland. This was called the new lodging facility. At its peak, there were about 750 men living here at the mine site. Another big change made by Fain was the use of Alco trucks to haul supplies to the mine. So the Perseverance mine looked like this in 1908 and like this in 1914. So at the same time they were making all the improvements here at the mine site, they were also working in Sheep Creek Valley on the other side of the mountain. They started into what had been the original tunnel for the Silver Queen mine. It was 1,200 feet long, and it was headed in the right direction, but they had to expand it to 10 feet wide and 8 feet high. They had 70 men working on the tunnel. They worked 6-hour shifts, 4 6-hour shifts a day. In November of 1912, they got to the end of the old Silver Queen tunnel, and they started drilling a new tunnel this way. At the same time, the miners were in the back of this tunnel behind me in the Alexander Crosscut. Here, they had to drill down 625 feet to arrive at the level that would be the Sheep Creek adit. In November of 1912, they reached that level, and they started to drill horizontally toward Sheep Creek. The two crews met on the 1st of April, 1914. The tunnel was complete. This was the longest tunnel in the world at that time. This was the lift station at the end of the Alexander Crosscut. These operators raised and lowered miners, gold ore, and supplies. The lift gauge shows that the cage is down to level 13. That was the Sheep Creek adit. This is at the bottom of the shaft at level 13, at the end of the 10,500-foot tunnel. So now that we've seen it all here, let's go to the other side of the mountain, Sheep Creek, and see what they were doing there and on the shores of Gastineau Channel. So let's take another hike. We're now on the shore of Gastineau Channel. It was here that they built the main support facilities for the mine. It was a regular small town here, named after the man in charge, Fain. To start, they built this small dock with a tram that went up the mountain. The tram went up to about the 700-foot elevation and served as the first leg for getting men and materials up the Sheep Creek Valley. This winch was at the top of that tram. Fain looked like this in 1912 at the start of construction. They built these 50-man bunkhouses on the west side of town. Next to them was the boarding house, seen here in the center. This contained the kitchen and dining facilities for the workers. Then there was the carpenter shop. Note all the lumber on the dock. The only building that remains standing here in Fain today is behind me. This was the machine shop. This was a very modern facility. When this mine was in operation, they were capable of manufacturing parts and repairing all the machinery that they used in the mine. This was the machine shop in 1914. This group of men were standing on the dock here. Bart Thane is the second from the left. They built a second tram, seen here on the left. That carried men and supplies up to the mill site. I'm walking on what was once the only street here at Fain. On this side of the street was the general store. The general store sold just about everything: clothing, food, hardware items. There was also a bakery here. And both of these facilities were not only meant for the employees, but anyone could shop there. On this side of the street was the central office building for the mining operation. The store, seen here from the back, is the large building on the right. The building on the left was a warehouse. This is the front of the store. On the right is the central office building. Behind me is all the remains of that office building today, the vault. This was a steam plant. Steam was used to heat all of the buildings here. For recreation for the employees here, there was also a gymnasium here and a clubhouse. And there was a library. For the children, there was a 2-room schoolhouse. There was always time for recreation. This was the Alaska Gastineau Mining Company's baseball team in 1913. All of the mines had baseball teams, and they were very competitive. On the east side of town, there were about 30 small homes for the married workers. This was Fain in 1913. This was Fain in 1916. All of the facilities here at Fain were completed by the early part of 1914. Now we'll go up the mountain and we'll see the other facilities that were built on the Tidewater side of Mount Roberts. And we'll see the facilities in Sheep Creek Valley. This is Sheep Creek Valley. The head of the valley is behind me. And in that area there were several mines, including the Gould and Curry, the Sheraton, and the Gold Belt. The Silver Queen mine was on this side of Sheep Creek. The Perseverance mine is about 2 miles on the other side of the mountain behind me. Well, this is it. This is the Sheep Creek adit. This is the tunnel that started out as part of the Silver Queen mine. This tunnel goes 10,500 feet into the mountain to the Perseverance mine. The ore was brought out of this tunnel to the mill, and they carried supplies, of course, to the men who lived at the mine site through this tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, you have to go up 625 feet to the Alexander Crosscut, and then 2,400 feet out, and then you'll emerge in Silverbow Basin. This is how the adit looked in 1912, when it was the entrance to the Silver Queen mine. These miners were just starting the job of expanding and lengthening the tunnel. This was called Portal Camp here at the tunnel mouth. There was living quarters here for the men who worked at drilling the Sheep Creek adit. And of course they had a large compressor here to power their drills. The buildings that are here now were built by Echo Bay Mines in later years when they attempted to reopen the mine here. Looking from the adit down the valley, you can see the original buildings here. On the left was a compressor house. The building in the background was the mess hall. The larger building on the right was the bunkhouse. The other building was the clubhouse. The Silver Queen Mill was located on Sheep Creek behind me. It was there that they set up their test mill for their new process that they were developing. They used the material from Sheep Creek adit. Most of the material that came from the Sheep Creek adit was used in constructing the rail line between the tunnel and the mill. This elevated rail line led to the Silver Queen Mill. The mill is the large building on the left. The rail line between the Sheep Creek adit and the mill is about 1.5 miles long. And as I said, the first part of it was on the tailings from the Sheep Creek adit, which is where we are now. This is a ridge of those tailings. The rail line sits here beside me. When they ran out of the tailings, they switched to an elevated wooden trestle. This was the rail line during construction. Here we see a survey crew with a locomotive used during construction. This series shows the portal camp and the rail line after it was first completed. They were so plagued with snow slides that they built a snow shed about 1 mile long to cover the tracks. Here you can see the rail line go into a short tunnel. The train emerged from that tunnel here. This area was known as the rail yard. We're now at the top of the upper tram. This is one of the trams that came up from Fain, bringing the men to work at the coarse rock crusher and on the railroad. This was a turntable. They were able to turn the cars at a 90-degree angle and put them on the track. And then it could take supplies all the way to the Perseverance mine. Had to be an exciting way to start your day by coming up this tram, about a 45-degree angle pulled by a winch. Here you can see the top of the tram and the rail yard. The locomotives were powered by electricity. The wooden beams over the track supported the electric lines that provided that power. The house of the railroad superintendent can be seen here beyond the tunnel entrance. It is the only building that remains partially standing today. Before we go any further here at the Sheep Creek facilities, let's go take a look at the source of electricity that they were constructing at the same time they were piecing this all together. Salmon Creek is about 6 miles from Fain. This was the dining hall built for the construction workers. 2.5 miles up Salmon Creek, they found a place to build a dam, which they started in 1912. They built the railroad up Salmon Creek Valley to carry men and materials to the dam site. This was a locomotive used on that rail line. This was the first locomotive in the state of Alaska. It's now on display here at the Gastineau Mill. Horses were also used to pull the rail cars. The dam is 47 feet thick at its base. It's 7 feet thick at the top. The dam, which was Alaska's first year-round hydroelectric facility, was completed in 1914. Now we're back at Sheep Creek. Here we're looking from near the railroad yard toward the coarse rock crusher. We're now approaching the end of the rail line. You see remains of the wooden trestle that supported the tracks here beside me. and of a set of rail wheels here in front of me. The coarse rock crusher is just about 50 yards in front of us. We're now at the coarse rock crusher. We're on the top level of that crusher. The building was about 120 feet tall. The ore came here in trains that consisted of 40 cars, 40 10-ton cars pulled by an 18-ton Westinghouse Baldwin locomotive. When they pulled into the top of the crusher here, there was a device called the revolving tipple, and that was able to clamp 4 cars at a time and turn them upside down and dump the ore. The rail line continued another 400 or 500 feet beyond the building so that the train could pull the entire 40-car load through the building. This is the top of the crusher with an ore train on the right, the tipple on the left. Here you see the tipple in action. This is a closer view of the ore that was about to enter the milling process. This is the rail line that extended beyond the rock crusher. Now looking at the coarse rock crusher from below. The ore was dropped in above, and at first anything that would pass through a 2.5-inch mesh bypassed the coarse rock crusher altogether, and it went straight down a chute and into a large 8,000-ton storage bin, which was about 300 feet below where I'm standing. The rest of the ore went first to what was called a jaw crusher, and that crushed the ore down. Next, it went through a gyratory crusher, which is a large cone-shaped device with a screw-like inside that revolves around and slowly crushes the ore down. After the ore had passed through this facility, it was all 2 inches or less in size, and that could be handled by the mill. Here we see a view inside the crusher. This is another view that shows the tops of the gyratory crushers. Seen from below, the coarse rock crusher is the building in the upper right. Well, this is the conveyor tunnel. It's about 400 feet long. At the end of this tunnel was an 8,000-ton ore bin that they had blasted out of the rock. At the bottom of that bin, they poured concrete and built some chutes so that they could control the flow of the ore onto the conveyor belt. The purpose of this bin was to assure a surplus of ore and to make sure they could always supply a constant flow of ore to the mill once it was in operation. The conveyor belt was 42 inches wide, and it extended about 1,000 feet into the top of the mill, which was behind me. This area was all covered with a building to keep the ore dry. This was the end of the conveyor belt where the crushed ore dropped into the top of the mill. In this cross-section of the milling facilities, the coarse rock crusher is here. This is the 8,000-ton storage bin. The conveyor belt to the top of the mill was here. This is Bart Thane in his office with a map of his holdings behind him. Let's take a look at that map so that you can get an idea of the massive size of Fain's operation. The claims controlled by the Alaska Gastineau Gold Mining Company are outlined here in red. The entrance to the mine and the Alexander Crosscut is here. The entrance to the Sheep Creek Adit, which is the 10,500-foot tunnel, is here. The mill site above Fain is here. This was the Gastineau Mill. The site preparation here began in 1913. They cut down all the trees on the side of the mountain up to the 700-foot level down to Fain. Here at the mill site, they flushed off the topsoil so that when they poured concrete, they could be right against the bedrock. The first concrete was poured here in March of 1914. This building is 400 feet long. It was steel frame construction with galvanized metal siding. The first section of the mill was completed in February of 1915. At that time, the mill went into operation. Next to the mill is another building called the retreatment plant. We'll talk about that in a little bit. This was the mill in January of 1915. This is the top level of the mill. Basically, the mill had 4 levels. This was the roller crusher level. The ore dropped in from above off of the conveyor belt, first onto a screen, of a 1-inch screen. And any of the material that could pass through that screen bypassed this level and went straight to the next level. The rest of the ore went through the roller crushers. And after it was crushed, it was elevated back up to be dropped into the screen again, until all the material was able to pass through that screen. At that point, the material went to the next level down, the concentrating level. This was the roller mill floor. This is the second level down from the top in the mill. This is called the concentrating floor. It was here that water was added to the ore for the first time, and the material passed over what was called Wilfley tables. They vibrated and had riffles in them so they could separate ore by a specific gravity. After that, the material went to what was called a classifier. And that device separated out all the lighter materials that would not contain any gold. And the heavier material went to the next level down. This is the tube mill floor. Tube mills were large metal cylinders, 10 feet long, 7 feet in diameter. They were once mounted on these concrete piers. They would take the crushed ore from above and put it inside the tube mill. And they added Danish flint pebbles. These rocks like this, were brought from Denmark for this purpose. Flint is very hard, and that's why this was used. And the tube mills were rotated, a large tumbler, and the rocks would pulverize the ore. And when the ore finished in this process, it was essentially the consistency of sand. And I went from here to the next level down. Here we see the operator of the 30-ton crane that was above the tube mill floor. He is moving one of the tube mills into place. This is the lowest level of the mill. The material that came out of the tube mills from above came to this level. And here it went through another series of Wilfley tables, the vibrating table with the riffles that was able to separate the ore by its specific gravity. It was now easier to do that because the material was all the consistency of sand. So the heavy material that came off of this process went to the building next door, which is called the retreatment plant. The waste was flushed through the floor, through holes in the floor, which leads into a tunnel, and it was flushed as a slurry down to the beach, which were where all the tailings ended up. This was the bottom level, which was essentially the same as the third level up. It was called the concentrator floor. This was the retreatment plant. This building had 3 floors. The concentrates came from the mill, were brought to this building, and elevated to the top floor. Here, the ore went through the Wilfley tables 2 more times, with the riffles and waters and vibrating. After the second time, they were able to separate the free gold. That was the gold that was easily distinguishable in the ore. And that gold was melted into gold bars inside this building. There were no waste material from this building. All the concentrates that came here, other than the free gold, were bagged up and shipped to a smelter in California, where the rest of the gold was recovered. There were no chemicals used in the refining process here at the Gastineau mill. When the mill first went into operation in February, it was operating at about 25% of its capacity. Then by July of 1915, the mill was complete, and it was operating at 100% of capacity. They had estimated that they were capable of processing 6,000 tons of ore per day here. But they realized the mill was much more efficient than they expected, and it was capable of crushing up to 10,000 tons of ore per day. The problem was they did not have enough electrical power. So in June of 1915, they started on another project. About 8 miles northeast of here, which is in that direction over the mountain, is a lake called Annex Lake. It's at the 800-foot elevation. It's 150 feet deep. The plan was to tap that lake to generate electricity. And that required drilling a 1,300-foot tunnel underneath the lake. Now you really have to admire their engineering abilities to be able to figure out how to do that. That was the first time it had ever been done successfully in the world, to tap a lake. And you have to wonder about those miners that were in the tunnel with the drill bits, wondering exactly where the bottom of that lake really was. They built the powerhouse on the shores of Taku Inlet on the other side of the mountain. And from there, they constructed power lines over the mountain to the mill. When they blasted out the bottom of the lake, the tunnel filled with water, and then the connecting pipeline filled with water to the powerhouse. And within minutes, that facility was producing electricity. So in December of 1915, only 7 months after they started, Annex Lake was producing electricity. And Annex Lake still produces electricity for Juneau to this day. These are the power lines from Annex Lake. Here are some of the workers celebrating their accomplishments. This is the powerhouse on the shore of Taku Inlet. These were the generators inside of that powerhouse. This foundation once supported the assay house. The workers in this building were taking constant samples of the ore as it came to the mill and assaying it to determine the value. That way they knew what to expect from the milling process. The concrete platform behind me was support for the very accurate set of to determine those values. This is the assay house. It was located on the east side of the mill. During the years that this had operated as the Perseverance mine, they had averaged about $2 per ton. When they started with the new mill here, they were expecting to average about $1.80 per ton. But when they first went into production, they realized that their ore was not up to expectations. The first year of operation, the ore averaged $1.16 per ton. Their total cost here for mining and milling ore was an incredible 65 cents per ton. They expended a lot of time and effort drilling new tunnels in the mine in the desperate search for better ore, without much success. In 1917, the United States entered World War I. The mine here lost 25% of their workforce to the war effort. Fewer men meant less ore was mined, less ore was milled, and less gold was produced. Their average per ton that year was about $1.10. So now they had some real problems here. Not only did they have a lower grade ore, but they had less of it. Bart Thane knew that some changes had to be made for his mine to survive. He had hoped that Congress would increase the price of gold, but that didn't happen. He tried to consolidate with a neighboring mine, the Alaska Juneau mine. They had better ore, but they had a very inefficient mill. But Fred Bradley, who was the president of the Alaska Juneau mine, would have no parts of the Alaska Gastineau. Then came the final blow. The best ore was in an area of schist. Schist is a rock that is formed in layers, and it was prone to caving. When the caving finally reached the surface, as you can see here, surface water started running into the mine. That caused wet ore. They had put a lot of heavy timbers into the areas of schist, but they weren't able to prevent the inevitable. The mill here was designed for dry ore. When the wet ore was crushed, it turned to like cement, and it stuck to everything. and it became impossible to mill the ore in a cost-efficient manner. In June of 1921, the Alaska Gastineau Mining Company closed down. So, although this mine was a failure, they had accomplished a lot here. They drilled the longest tunnel in the world. They built 2 substantial hydroelectric projects in a time frame that will never be matched. And those projects still produce electricity. During their 9 years of operation, they drilled about 16 miles of tunnels, and they milled 11 million tons of ore. And from that, they recovered $9,740,500 worth of gold. And that was in days when gold sold for $20.67 an ounce. All of the mining and milling equipment here was dismantled and sold to other mining operations. Bart Thane tried desperately to find another use for his building here. A pulp mill was his best hope, but he couldn't make it happen. This photograph shows Bart Thane, seen here on the left. He was with some Japanese who were potential investors. They were his last great hope to save his investment. Fain became very depressed and started drinking heavily. While on a trip to New York, he contracted pneumonia. He died there on November 4th, 1927, at the age of 49. So another chapter in the mining history of Alaska had come to an end. Well, that concludes our tour of the Perseverance Mine and the Alaska Gastineau Mining Company.